In 2003, Freddy vs. Jason took the world by storm. Finally, after well over a decade in development, the two horror titans faced off on the big screen. And to fans' delight, it was a massive success. The film grossed nearly $120 million worldwide and was massively profitable for New Line Cinema. It also reiterated to them that people were ready to see these franchises come back in a big way. So naturally, they were going to go forward with a sequel, right? You would have to. Robert Englund had expressed interest in coming back as Freddy Krueger to rematch with Jason Voorhees. There was belief Ken Kersinger was going to come back as Jason Voorhees. And since the franchises were now back in the limelight and profitable, it seemed only natural to move forward with a sequel. So Jeff Katz penned a script for a sequel that would have continued Freddy vs. Jason and given them a round two, but also brought in a new player. Ashley Williams, Bruce Campbell's Ash from the Evil Dead franchise. The treatment was called Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. Initially, New Line Cinema had toyed with the idea of where to go next with Freddy vs. Jason. They had a big success and they wanted to make an even bigger one. So they felt they had to add a third player in there. They wanted to do it for horror fans, but as well to give themselves more money. They thought of Ash Williams. See, they toyed with Michael Myers, but a deal would have had to been made with Dimension or whoever else was involved, and they had no interest in that, especially after it seemed Halloween Resurrection at the time had killed Halloween for a while. They toyed with Pinhead, the Leprechaun, even the Tall Man. Jeff Katz would end up landing on Ash Williams. He thought this made the most sense. He thought merging Ash into Freddy and Jason's worlds would be the easiest. See, the basic idea of Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash was that Ash Williams was going to be relocating to Camp Crystal Lake, and Freddy and Jason were going to have to seek out the Necronomicon together to try to end their mutually shared torment. Now, it's a pretty basic idea. You merge those worlds together almost seamlessly. You know, the Necronomicon brings out demons. One could make the argument that Freddy and Jason are both demons of their own kind. Wouldn't really have been that far of a stretch. Why didn't the movie happen? Why, if the first movie was so successful and everybody seemed excited about the prospects of not only continuing from that crossover, but adding a third cog into that machine, why didn't it happen? Well, there's a multitude of reasons. See, when the idea was first floated around, Bruce Campbell was excited to, quote, kick both of their asses. That angered New Line Cinema behind closed doors, and they had meetings about that with Sam Raimi and his team about how that could not happen. Ash Williams was not going to be able to kill either one of those characters for good. It's believed that there were more disagreements than just that one, but that one disagreement, the major disagreement, led Bruce Campbell to say that the film was creatively bankrupt and that he saw no point in going forward with it if Ash was basically just going to be fodder for both of them. Sam Raimi agreed. They did not want to work with New Line Cinema on this idea if it meant that Ash Williams was just going to get the shaft and it was going to end up being Freddy and Jason's show all over again. One could make the argument, well, that's kind of the point. The previous movie was about the two of them. This would have been under New Line, who at the time owned the rights to both franchises. Freddy and Jason were going to be the stars of the show. So why even bring in Ash in the first place? To make more money, sure, to bring more people in and to kind of just expand the mythology in the world, but maybe also to give more gravitas to Freddy and Jason if they were able to take down Ash Williams. But that's not the only reason that the film didn't get made. Bruce Campbell would later give more reasons why this film never happened, and one of them being the financial side of it. See, New Line Cinema wanted to cut back the budget from Freddy vs. Jason a bit, which didn't really make much sense. You were going to be bringing another icon of horror into this series. Things would naturally have to be bigger, more bombastic, right? On top of that, bringing in another character that was owned by another production company, the idea was to split the profits 3 ways. The parties were not interested in that. None of them. And that financial impasse is a big reason why the film never happened. Another reason that had been rumored for a while but has never been confirmed was Robert Englund. See, at the time, apparently, people believed he was rejuvenated to come back as Freddy Krueger, especially to do it with Freddy vs. Jason, a movie they had talked about and planned for a long time. But behind the scenes, a lot of people at New Line Cinema believed that Robert was tired of playing Freddy. He was simply tired of sitting in the makeup chair. Now, we found as the years have gone on, Robert kind of was at that point. He kind of was burnt out of having to do these hours of makeup every day he would film as Freddy Krueger. As he got older, he didn't have much of an interest of doing that anymore. So there's belief that Robert played a big role in that too, that he just wouldn't have ended up wanting to do it in the grand scheme of things and was mentioning that to others behind the scenes. Now, the project didn't die entirely. It had sat on a shelf, but there was still talk at New Line Cinema for years after that about going back and doing this idea, and even some rewrites were made. But it became apparent once the remake craze really started with Halloween, they were going to go the remake route. Friday the 13th would go that direction, and then A Nightmare on Elm Street would follow, and it just seemed like what was done is done. The hype that was there in 2003 for these two characters facing off was no longer there. Remakes and reboots were the new thing, and that was just the final nail in the coffin for Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. And although we didn't get the film version of this story, there is a comic book series of this idea, as well as even a sequel comic book series. So if you really wanted to see what this could have been, you can try looking into those comics and read for yourself. Now, in 2017, BloodyDisgusting.com exclusively reported and provided the visual evidence of a memo from around this time that gave us a little more insight as to why this created strife behind the scenes. In this memo, directly to New Line Cinema, Ash Williams was to kill Freddy Krueger for good. Now, Bruce Campbell had jokingly talked about killing both of them, but of course, that's just this macho gravitas. You talk because he's the baddest on campus, right? No. He was going to kill Freddy Krueger for good, forever. This memo showed that. That was just the beginning of all of these issues we laid out as to why Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash never happened. Now, if you ask me, it's something I would have loved to have seen. I love all three of these characters. I especially have a love for the Evil Dead franchise, and I would have loved to have seen Ash Williams face off against two titans of the horror industry. But I also happen to think that this idea shouldn't be totally dead in the water. Maybe the specific idea of merging all three worlds, but continuing Freddy vs. Jason in some aspect, I think could make complete sense. You don't have to be tied down to all the previous continuity. You can pit these two against each other, give us a plot that makes sense for why they're going against each other, and let them have at it. That's really all we need as horror fans. I know there's a lot of horror fans that are not fans of crossover films. They feel like it weakens previous films in these series. I understand why you're not a fan of it, but I choose to think of these things as kind of like a different path, a different timeline. We all love these characters. We argue amongst each other of who would win in whatever given fight, whatever scenario we want to think up. It's really cool to see it play out on screen. It's also no small feat that this ever happened in the first place. That's a really big deal. And it tells you it could absolutely happen again with the right people behind the scenes working to make it a reality. So while Freddy vs. Jason never got its sequel, Ash never got to merge his world with the other two's and kick both of their asses,